HMS Rodney was the second of the Nelson-class battleships. She was one of the Mighty Seven, which wasn't in the Washington Naval Treaty. She went head-to-head with the German battleship Bismarck, scoring a torpedo hit on her, the only one in recorded history with another battleship, and she killed Gunfalute and Lindemann by hitting the captain's bridge. Later on in the war, she was used as artillery support at D-Day and the Italian landings. But unfortunately, due to her being old and unrepairable, she was eventually decommissioned and then sold for scrap.
The first shot landed 300 yards from the target.
Yo, what's up homies, it's the Gangsta, and today is the next issue in the Ships of War collection. Yes, it is the second Nelson-class battleship HMS Rodney. This is issue 26. Now obviously let's have a look at the ship. Now Rodney's obviously got a different camouflage than the Nelson model we had. She's got this nice green, blue, white camouflage along her side, on both sides. And she's got it also on her deck. Camouflage is really difficult to do on model ships, but I actually am learning on how to paint models better now. Turns out you use sellotape, masking tape. Anyway, so at the bow we can see her 16-inch guns. Very nice. She had 12 of these. The largest guns ever mounted on a British battleship, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. We did plan to have 18-inch, but obviously they were thrown out the window. And at the stern we have 5-inch guns. Correct me if I'm wrong. But she was a rather unusual design. She was one of the Mighty Seven, we call the Washington Naval Treaty, and so her and her sister were the only ships that were built like this, and so the rest was restricted. And as you can see, a major distinct difference from her and her sister is this mast here on her main superstructure bridge area. So anyway, let's have a look at the magazine. Yes, she was the only battleship ever to hit another battleship with a torpedo, and that was Bismarck, actually. So there's a picture of her on the front cover. This is her, and behind her is Barham, I believe. HMS Barham. Anyway, it's another image of her. Next issue we've got Warspite, obviously one of the most infamous British battleships and iconic battleships ever. Everybody knows Warspite, hopefully. But anyway, so this talks about her, how obviously she was designed and all that. And that she was designed differently than essentially other ships because she was so weird in her design, she was so unique, because she had her guns mounted in essentially the midships of the ship and her superstructure near the stern. It was insane. This is obviously a picture from the air. But obviously what happened was that after World War I we had this big arms race with America. And obviously, what happened was that we went, right, we got a slight problem here, mates, because we're going to go to war, over who makes bigger ships. So obviously, there was a Washington Naval Treaty in 1920, originally 1927, correct me if I'm wrong, it might be 23. And what happened was that obviously this restricted the ships, and only 7 ships were built, known as the Big Seven, or the Mighty Seven, as Nagato mentioned in Kankole, the anime TV show. She said, I'm one of the Big Seven, or never underestimate the Big Seven, or something like that. And essentially it consisted of the Japanese ships Nagato and Mutsu, the British ships Nelson and Rodney, and the USS Maryland and a bunch of her sisters. And so what happened was that the initial design for her went to a man named Tennyson, and obviously he designed her to be state-of-the-art, and she was actually state-of-the-art at the time. She was on the average speed of 23 knots, that was her highest speed, and which was at the time capable of keeping up with World War I battleships, but not World War II battleships, which later came into play. So she was very powerful but very slow, and she was designed differently. She had a really rather weird design to her, like her sister Nelson. And obviously here's a picture of her that was in the just behind the front cover, of her with Barham in the background. Here we've got her commanding officer, who is Captain J.W. Rivet Carnett, and on the right we have Commander McKay. Really good name. So anyway, when war broke out, she was obviously going for an overhaul to get her, remade and stuff like that. But obviously war broke out, and like HMS Hood, she couldn't get it, so she didn't get upgraded. And so what happened was that she did her time in the Atlantic. Sounds like a prison sentence. Did your time in the Atlantic? Yeah. And obviously to stop German raiders. And so what happened was that obviously the first action she saw was when she tried to shoot down planes, but she failed. Because the AA guns weren't really that good. She only had around 8 pom-pom guns. And she was really underpowered when it came to AA. Anyway, so here is her compass platform. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is obviously sort of where the ship stood. We have the officer on watch there. And we have, this here is a normal rating who is checking the sighting. So they'll be checking the sight and everything, say, given bearing, whatever, of a certain object. These here are obviously the cool thing where where you shout down the pipe and blah, 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 do this, do that. And obviously this is someone there who is doing a radio thing. I don't know, I really need to look up more about how the actual bridge and the action stations and stuff work for the ship. But essentially, she did have one problem. Her guns weren't really that good. As in, they could only fire 1 shot per minute, essentially, when they were put under pressure. Well, no, when they weren't put under pressure, because obviously what had happened is that it caused slight problems if they rapid fired, and not only that, but when the one gun fired, the one closest to the superstructure fired, it actually caused damage to her. But obviously they managed to correct that later on, just before D-Day, but I'll talk about that later. And obviously another problem was that her superstructure was that big, she had a problem called sailing, and where the wind would just blow her off course because her superstructure is that large. So she'd be there going like, whee, off course. And her rudder actually snapped off when she was trying to evade torpedoes, and she was hit 3 times, but 2 of them broke and the one didn't explode. And here is a picture of her going through the Atlantic. Very horrible ocean, the Atlantic, but the Pacific is just... Don't get lost in the Pacific, because you're not going to be found. Anyway, so obviously she had the primary 16-inch guns located here, along the ship. She had the secondary 6-inch guns. I always get my gun inches wrong. I might say 5-inch or 6-inch. Primary guns I'm quite weird with, but not the ones. So here's the 6-inch guns here at the stern. These could also be raised and used as AA guns. Here is one of the pom-poms at the stern of the ship, as we can see. She was armed with 8 of those, which is very small. Her protection was obviously designed to essentially get rid of thingy. She had torpedo bulges, but these were later removed. This is her late verification, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is probably D-Day, I'm guessing, maybe. Verification of her. Maybe just after Bismarck, because she didn't look like this when she went up against Bismarck. Or did she? I don't think so. Anyway, and she was named after Admiral Rodney, who was a pain in the ass to Admiral Hood. There was the 3 admirals. Obviously, Admiral Rodney, who was a bit of a... he was very similar to Admiral Beatty. Essentially, Admiral Hood was like Jellicoe and Rodney was like Beatty. And then Rodney was older, so he died. And Admiral Hood was like, yay. And then along came Admiral who everybody should know, Admiral Nelson. And he annoyed HMS... he annoyed Admiral Hood as well. It's actually a fun fact. It's fun stuff to look up. Anyway, and yes, I was right. During the battle with Bismarck, launched 12 torpedoes. Most missed, but 1 hit Bismarck and exploded midships on the starboard side, making Rodney the only battleship ever in history to have torpedoed another battleship. And that's what I love saying about. I just love saying that about Rodney. You know how Rodney's special? Because she did that. But yes, so what happened was that the home fleet was in Scapa Flow, and basically they went backwards and forwards from place to place in the Atlantic. And what happened was that she was attacked several times by planes, but she obviously, went, bugger off, like typical British, get the hell out of here. And so what happened was that there was a distress signal from an armed cruiser called the Roraplidini, that supposedly spot German battlecruisers, which were German battleships, don't argue with me, Scharnhorst and Eisenhower, and they basically sunk her before the British fleet could get there. Not very good. So here's a picture of HMS Rodney. Obviously, she wasn't fast, but she was, she was very imposing. I wouldn't want to go up against Rodney, not unless I was in an Admiral-class battlecruiser. Then yes, I would. These are one of her pom-poms, essentially. These were the best AA guns that we had at the time, so yeah. And it was all of a seaplane. Obviously, a lot of our ships had the role of a seaplane, standard seaplane. Obviously, used reconnaissance and also for, you know, getting the range on ships which play World of Warships. Obviously, this is the actual men operating one of the guns. As we can see, what happened is that the shells go in here, sideways, and what happens is that they flip them around, push them in, and that closes, and then bang. And we probably could get about maybe 3 shells per minute, I'm guessing. I'm just estimating it. And here was Operation Pedestal that she took part in when one of the convoys came under attack. Here we can see her on the left. Here's the convoy. And I believe that's Manchester, HMS Manchester, that on the right. So yeah. But I mean, just look at all that. Flak opening up, Jesus Christ. And obviously here's one of the 16-inch guns. They were absolutely huge, the size of them. But anyway, and she did actually suffer. She wasn't as well equipped as her sister was, upgraded, because she actually did suffer damage when she fired, and she had leaks. And she had this problem that some of her decks on the top would break off from the hull, and they just really needed a thing to change it, but they just couldn't at the time. But yes. And this is one during one of the shore bombardments in the late stage war. It might have been the Italian or the German. But honestly, this is what makes the Nelson class unique, is that, you know, you could essentially park a Nelson class and just rotate the guns and just blow the hell. That's like, the first time, when I saw Nelson in World of Warships, a Nelson player, they practically did what all Dunkirk players do. They just park the ship and then just fire with their main front guns. And here's one of the actual shells. Here's one of the guns inside when they actually... You can see there the barrel there, barrel there, barrel there. And what happens is that here, they go in, a bit there, and then they just, boom, fire. Obviously what happened was that she went in to kill Bismarck. And in fact, she was the one that actually killed Gunther Lüttichens and Captain Lindemann. A 16-inch shell from her literally went straight through the Admiral's bridge. And just, the captain's bridge, and just absolutely ripped it apart. You'll actually see in James Cameron's documentary on the Bismarck, he says, I don't think it was sunk, and then what happened is that he goes, oh, it looks quite fine on this side, and then he goes to the other side, and he just sees this massive gaping hole where Lüttichens and Lindemann were, and he was like, yeah, they wouldn't have survived that. And so what happened was that, obviously, I personally believe that Bismarck wasn't sunk, she was scuttled, because it's just, but I'm working on an experiment, blah, 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 etc., etc. Anyway, so after that she went, obviously, in 1943, she was obviously in poor condition. But obviously what happened was that she was about to get pulled away, and then what happened was that Winston Churchill said, no, we need her. And she was essentially used in D-Day. And what happened was that she had to go and pound the hell out of the Germans. And so what happened was that they removed her catapult, they removed her plane, and they fixed her up as best they could, and she was essentially one of the best goddamn coastal bombardments we ever had. In fact, a German officer reportedly, where is it? It was just stated that the concentrated fire from the ship was unlike anything he had previously seen on any European battlefield. Except Kursk. And another man said, we'll fight your tanks, but those naval guns are too much. Because obviously, if you saw Hackshaw Ridge, the ships they were using, they had 16-inch guns, so obviously you could see what they did. You could see what Rodney did with their 16-inch guns, but she attacked the 1st, 9th, and the 12th SS Panzer Divisions, and gave troop support, and essentially more and more. Obviously, right at the end of the war, September 1944, she was eventually on her last convoy escort. She made the flagship, but what happened was obviously due to problems, she never really left. She wasn't like her sister. She never really left her moorings, and she was eventually paid off in Portsmouth 1945. And what happened was that she was eventually scrapped in 1949. She was bought in 1948 and then scrapped. And that's the end of Rodney. So she was quite So the only actions that she did do was against Bismarck, essentially, ship-wise. She did bombardments at D-Day and on the Italian shores, but essentially, and convoy support, and that was really all she did. Anyway, next issue we've got the HMS Warspite. Yes, this is one of the most infamous battleships Britain ever has. She was launched in 1913, and basically she was equipped and she became the Terminator. She was absolute nuts, essentially, and we all of us British love her. We absolutely love her because Hood sunk, so basically we found a replacement ship, and Warspite is. But eventually she got scrapped for Warspite. So that's the next issue, and then after that we've got some stupid French ship, Strasbourg. Thank you very much. I'll end this video here, so don't anyway. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, peace out.